In part 1, we ran the first half of the equation. The 4 ways your nose is biologically wired to your reproductive system, the molecule it produces, the tissue it shares with your genitals, the nerve hub with a direct line to your pelvic organs, the desire pathway that only works through the nose. We also touched on something at the end, that nasal tissue and genital tissue don't just share structure, they share hormonal governance. The same hormones that maintain your reproductive organs also maintain the lining of your nose. Today, part 2, we show you what happens when that whole equation runs wrong, because the output is not subtle. Low testosterone, declining sperm quality, unreliable ovulation, libido that quietly disappears, a hormone cycle interrupted every single night while you sleep, and a two-way feedback loop between your hormones and your nasal tissue that, once you see it, explains a lot of things that never made sense before. These are the calculated results of one wrong variable, chronic mouth breathing. But here is what I love about math. Find the wrong variable, change it, and the whole equation shifts. That is exactly what the second half of this episode delivers. Let's solve it. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Breath Math. I'm Nisha. Part 2 picks up directly from where we left off. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I'd really encourage you to start there. Everything we cover today builds on the biology we laid out in that episode. But if you're joining fresh, here is the one line version. Your nose is not just an air filter, it is directly physically connected to your reproductive and sexual health through 4 biological pathways. And every time you breathe through your mouth instead of your nose, you are bypassing all 4 of them. Today, we look at what that costs and then the 5 practices that fix it, including one specifically for during intimacy. Stay all the way through. Let's get into the math. The hormone loop, how mouth breathing and your hormones work against each other. Let me start with something that will make a lot of things click into place. Your reproductive hormones, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and your stress hormone, cortisol, are all made from the same raw material inside your body. Think of it like a shared ingredient. When your body reads a stress signal, even a quiet background one, it prioritizes cortisol. And the more it makes cortisol, the less of that shared ingredient is left for your reproductive hormones. Less testosterone, less estrogen, less progesterone. Now, the nasal breathing connection. When you breathe through your mouth chronically, your nervous system never fully settles into its calm state. It stays in low grade alert, like an alarm that never fully disarms. In that state, cortisol demand runs continuously, and continuously, reproductive hormones pay the price. Slowly, quietly, over months and years. The symptoms get blamed on age or stress, never on breathing. That is the first direction. But here is where it becomes a loop. In part 1, we saw that the nasal lining shares tissue type and hormonal governance with genital tissue. Estrogen and testosterone receptors sit directly in the nasal mucosa, which means when those reproductive hormones drop from chronic cortisol pressure, the nasal tissue degrades too. It thins, it dries, mucus production falls. Dry, thinned nasal tissue means a blocked nose. A blocked nose forces mouth breathing, which raises cortisol, which drops hormones further, which degrades nasal tissue further, which blocks the nose further. And as the nasal lining thins, it also loses its immune barrier, its ability to trap pathogens and protect against infection. more respiratory infections, more sinusitis, more nasal inflammation, more blockage, more mouth breathing. The cycle feeds itself. This is why nasal breathing is not just a habit, it is a maintenance system. Every nasal breath keeps the tissue active, the hormones supported, and the loop from closing in on itself. Break it at any point, and the whole equation begins to shift. The sleep chapter, the most important connection in this entire episode. Of everything in part 2, this is the section I want you to hold on to most because this is where mouth breathing causes the most direct, measurable hormonal damage. And it happens while you're completely unaware. Here is the key fact: a significant portion of your daily testosterone production in both men and women, not just men, happens during sleep, specifically during deep sleep. While you're in those deepest stages, your brain sends a signal to the reproductive organs to produce testosterone. This is your body's overnight hormone reset. For this to work, two things are needed. You need to actually reach deep sleep and stay there long enough for the cycle to complete. And your body needs consistent, uninterrupted oxygen delivery throughout the night. Mouth breathing directly disrupts both. Here is exactly how. When you breathe through your mouth during sleep, the airway is more likely to partially collapse. This causes snoring, and snoring, even mild snoring, means your airway is narrowed. Your body is working harder to move air. That extra effort creates brief moments of lighter sleep throughout the night. Not enough to fully wake you up, but enough to pull you out of deep sleep before the testosterone production cycle finishes. You go to bed for 8 hours. You wake up thinking you've slept, but your deep sleep was fragmented and your overnight testosterone production was repeatedly interrupted. In more significant cases, mouth breathing during sleep leads to something called sleep apnea, where the airway doesn't just narrow, it closes completely. Breathing stops. The brain detects the oxygen drop and sends an emergency signal to restart breathing. This can happen 5, 10, 20, 30 times per hour. Every single time, cortisol spikes, deep sleep resets. The hormone production cycle starts over from zero. The person rarely remembers any of this happening, but the hormonal evidence shows up the next morning and the morning after that, and every morning after years of unaddressed mouth breathing during sleep. Research is very clear. People who mouth breathe during sleep and develop sleep apnea have significantly lower testosterone levels than people who breathe through their nose. And when nasal breathing is restored through whatever approach works for them, testosterone levels improve, energy improves, libido improves. This is not a general sleep affects hormones statement. This is specifically mouth breathing disrupts deep sleep, and deep sleep is when testosterone is made. The chain is direct. The link is nasal breathing. For women, sleep apnea often goes undiagnosed because it looks different. Women with this condition frequently don't snore loudly. Instead, they present with exhaustion, mood changes, unexplained weight gain, irregular cycles, and low libido. Because the presentation is quieter, many women go years without connecting the dots. The hormonal chain is exactly the same: disrupted deep sleep, disrupted overnight hormone production. Cortisol spikes instead of testosterone pulses. The starting point for all of it: keep the mouth closed at night. For the men, the direct links to male reproductive health. Let me speak directly to the men now and to anyone who shares a life with a man who needs to hear this. Male reproductive health is under discussed And the connection between daily breathing patterns and male reproductive function is almost entirely absent from mainstream health advice. Let me change that. Beyond the sleep mechanism we covered in section 2, every hour of daytime, mouth breathing is also feeding the cortisol hormone competition from section 1. Months and years of this quietly pulls testosterone down. The symptoms low drive, low energy, difficulty building muscle, feeling flat are real and frequently treated with supplements when what actually needs changing is the breathing. Here is the piece almost no one talks about in fertility conversations. Healthy sperm production needs a low inflammation environment. The cells that make sperm are sensitive. Chronic mouth breathing raises systemic inflammation through elevated cortisol, through disrupted oxygen balance, and that inflammatory environment directly damages sperm. It reduces numbers, motility, how well they swim, and how correctly they are formed. On top of this, remember nitric oxide from part 1? It also plays a direct role in the final step sperm need to complete before they can fertilize an egg. When nitric oxide is low from mouth breathing, sperm may not complete this step properly. When a couple faces unexplained male fertility challenges, lower count, poor motility, high fragmentation, the question, how does he breathe, is almost never asked. Based on the biology, it should be one of the first. This is almost never discussed in the context of men, but it is one of the most direct nasal breathing connections of all. Your diaphragm and your pelvic floor work as a team, the top and bottom of the same pressure system inside your body. Every deep nasal inhale pushes the diaphragm down, which simultaneously releases and lengthens the pelvic floor. Every exhale brings both back up. 20,000 times a day, this is a natural, continuous cycle. Men who mouth breathe are almost always shallow chest breathers. The diaphragm barely moves. The pelvic floor never gets cycled. Over time, it becomes chronically tight, and a tight pelvic floor in men is directly linked to difficulty maintaining erection, premature ejaculation, and pelvic discomfort. Not from injury, from years of breathing that never gave it the movement it needed. Every nasal breath is pelvic floor therapy. Either you are doing it or you are not. For the women, cycles, fertility, and the nasal breathing connection. Now, the female specific picture, because while the hormone loop and sleep mechanisms apply to everyone, there are reproductive consequences that are unique to the female body and deserve their own conversation. Ovulation is the first thing the body quietly pulls back on when cortisol is elevated from chronic mouth breathing. The chain is direct. Mouth breathing leads to nervous system stays in alert mode, leads to cortisol blocks. The brain signal that triggers ovulation leads to the egg is not released. Menstruation can still happen. So, cycles appear normal on the surface, but ovulation didn't actually occur. The reproductive function underneath is suppressed. Women with irregular cycles, shortened luteal phases, or unexplained difficulty conceiving are frequently told to reduce stress. True, but incomplete, because the one thing continuously feeding their stress axis every hour of every day and night is the one thing nobody asks about: how they breathe. Endometriosis is fundamentally an inflammatory condition. Anything that adds to systemic inflammation worsens it, and chronic mouth breathing through elevated cortisol and impaired oxygen delivery adds to that load consistently. Women with endometriosis who bring daily nasal breathwork into their routine regularly report reduced pain, calmer cycles, and better quality of life. The breathing doesn't cure the condition, but it removes one of its persistent drivers. We covered how the diaphragm pelvic floor cycle works in section 3. For women, the consequences of that cycle being absent are specific. A pelvic floor that has never been properly released becomes chronically tight, contributing to painful intercourse, reduced sensation, and difficulty with arousal. A pelvic floor that has never been properly toned becomes weak, contributing to poor pelvic support and loss of sensation over time. Nasal diaphragmatic breathing serves both simultaneously. Release on the inhale, tone on the exhale, every breath. For women who are pregnant or trying to conceive, nasal breathing has direct benefits for the developing baby. Nitric oxide from nostril breathing improves blood vessel health throughout the body, including the vessels supplying the uterus. Better uterine blood flow means better oxygen and nutrient delivery to the baby. And nasal breathing keeps the oxygen carbon dioxide balance in the blood stable. When this tips from mouth breathing, the body holds on to oxygen rather than releasing it to the tissues, including the uterus and placenta. Mouth breathing during pregnancy is not a harmless habit to fix later. It directly affects both the oxygen the developing baby receives and the mother's nervous system state throughout. What ancient yoga science knew first? Before we get to practices, I want to step back and look at the bigger picture because everything we have covered across both episodes, the nasal tissue, the nerve connections, the hormone loop, the pelvic floor cycle, the relationship between breath and reproductive vitality, none of this is new. Ancient yoga science documented all of it in different language without modern instruments, but with a precision that becomes more remarkable the more science catches up. Let me walk you through the most important pieces. Across every classical yoga text, the Hatyog Pradipika, the Shiv Swaroday, the Upanishads, the nose is consistently described as the primary gateway for prana, life force, the animating energy of the body. This was not metaphor. These teachers observed over generations of direct practice that the quality and pathway of breath determines the quality of life force available to the entire organism. Mouth breathing was understood as a drain, a leak of vital energy. Nasal breathing was the only pathway through which prana entered the body fully. What they called prana, we now understand as the cascade of biological effects: nitric oxide, SPG activation, hormonal balance, nervous system regulation, that only nasal breathing delivers. Different language, the same truth. Now let's understand how Apana Vayu relates to the pranic force within the pelvis. This is the concept I find most directly relevant to everything in this episode. In yogic anatomy, prana moves through the body in five distinct directions called the Vayus. Each Vayu governs a specific region and set of functions. Apana Vayu is the downward moving force and it governs the pelvic region specifically. Reproductive function, elimination, the health of the uterus, ovaries, and the testes. Classical texts state clearly that when Apan Vayu is balanced and flowing, reproductive health is supported. When it is disrupted through incorrect breathing, through stress, through disconnection from the natural breath cycle, reproductive and sexual functions suffer. And what regulates Apan Vayu? Diaphragmatic nasal breathing, the pressure cycle between the diaphragm and the pelvic floor that were discussed in sections 3 and 4. Every deep inhale draws apana downward, creating space and release in the pelvis. Every exhale lifts and tones it. Ancient yogis were describing the diaphragm pelvic relationship just in the language of energy rather than anatomy. The physics was the same. Ojas, the vital essence, is one of the most significant concepts in both classical yoga and Ayurveda. It is described as the body's deepest vital essence, the refined end product of healthy digestion, healthy sleep, healthy reproduction, and healthy breath. Ojas governs immunity, vitality, mental clarity, and the capacity for intimacy. The texts are explicit. Chronic stress depletes Ojas. Improper breathing depletes Ojas. And when Ojas is low, reproductive health suffers, immunity weakens, and the body loses its natural radiance and resilience. Nasal breathing, proper sleep, and calm nervous system tone are all described as practices that build and protect Ojas, which maps directly onto what we now understand about cortisol, testosterone, immune function, and the role of nasal breathing in maintaining all three. Swara Yoga, the yoga of breath flow, gave us one of the most precise ancient maps of nasal cycle. The Shiva Swarodaya, a text over 1,000 years old, describes the alternation of airflow between the left and right nostrils in remarkable detail and maps how these shifts influence different physical, mental, and energetic states within the body. Left nostril dominance, called Chandra or Ida Swar, is associated with cooling, calming, and restorative qualities. Right nostril dominance, called Surya or Pingla, is associated with heat, activation, metabolism, and outward energy. The text even describes how these breathing patterns shift across different bodily states and activities, including digestion, vitality, reproductive health, fertility, and intimacy. Modern research now confirms that airflow naturally alternates between nostrils throughout the day and that these shifts are closely connected to changes in nervous system activity, brain function, hormones, and physiological regulation. These teachers did not have labs. They did not measure estrogen, cortisol, or nervous system activity. But through thousands of years of disciplined observation, they arrived at patterns that modern anatomy and neuroscience are only beginning to understand clearly now. This is what breath math is built on, the place where ancient observation and modern measurement begin describing the same truth. When both say the same thing, you can trust it completely. Five practices, the nasal breathing protocol. Everything across both episodes leads here. Knowledge that doesn't change what you do is just interesting. So, here are five practices specific, achievable, directly connected to the biology from both parts. Start with practice one. Build consistency before adding the next. This is a daily system, not a one time fix. First practice nasal only breathing all day. This is the foundation. Everything else builds on it. Close your mouth, breathe through your nose at rest, while working, while walking, every moment of the day when you are not actively speaking. If this feels difficult, if your nose feels blocked, this is important information and it is not permanent. A blocked nose in a chronic mouth breather is almost always inflamed tissue that has swollen from years of disuse. The more you mouth breathe, the more blocked your nose becomes. The more blocked it is, the more you mouth breathe. It is a cycle and it can be broken. Nasal rinsing with warm salt water, a neti pot, or a simple saline spray reduces this inflammation over weeks of regular use. Steam inhalation helps. In Ayurvedic practice, nasya, a few drops of warm sesame oil placed into the nostrils, lubricates and soothes the nasal lining from inside. If there is a structural issue like deviated septum or chronic sinusitis, see an ENT, but do not accept a permanently blocked nose as just how you are. Restore the passage first. Second practice, Nadi Shodhana or alternate nostril breathing, 10 minutes daily. This is the single most powerful practice across everything we have covered in both episodes. Alternate nostril breathing directly stimulates both nasal passages, activates the nerve hub we discussed in part 1, and balances the nervous system between its alert and calm states. Clinical research shows it reduces cortisol and improves the body's ability to regulate its own stress response over time. For reproductive health, it reduces the cortisol that is competing with your hormones, supports the natural nasal cycle, and creates a sustained calm state that the reproductive system needs to function well. Here is how to do it. Sit comfortably, spine tall. Use your right thumb to close the right nostril and right ring finger to close the left. Now, close the right nostril. Inhale slowly through the left for 4 counts. Close both nostrils. Hold for 4 counts. Now exhale from the right nostril for 8 counts. Inhale again through the right for 4 counts. Close both. Exhale for 8 counts. This is one round. Do 10 rounds. The exhale, being twice the length of the inhale, is what activates the calming response. Do not rush it. For women, this practice is particularly valuable in the week before menstruation when the nervous system is most reactive. 10 minutes daily in that window is real, direct hormonal support that costs nothing. Third practice, diaphragmatic nasal breathing, the pelvic floor reset. 10 minutes, twice daily, morning and before sleep. Lie on your back, knees bent, feet flat, one hand on your chest, one on your belly. Breathe in slowly through your nose. Belly rises, chest stays still. As your belly rises, feel a gentle releasing sensation low in your pelvis. Your pelvic floor is lengthening on the inhale. Pause a beat. Breathe out slowly through your nose. Belly falls. Feel your pelvic floor gently lift back up on the exhale. This is simultaneous diaphragm and pelvic floor training. 200 breath repetitions per session. For men, directly addresses the pelvic tightness linked to erectile difficulty and ejaculatory control. For women, releases pelvic tension that contributes to painful intercourse while toning the floor for better sensation and support. This practice looks too simple to matter. Give it 3 weeks of daily consistency. Your pelvic floor will tell you whether it matters. Fourth practice, the pre sleep nasal reset, 5 minutes. The 5 minutes before you fall asleep set the hormonal tone for the entire night. Lying in your sleeping position, mouth closed, breathe in through the nose for 4 counts, out through the nose for 8 counts. Just this for 5 minutes. If you know you mouth breathe during sleep, dry mouth in the morning, snoring, tired despite a full night, consider sleep mouth tape. A small strip of skin safe tape placed gently over the lips. There are products made specifically for this. It sounds uncomfortable. Within a week of trying it, most people don't notice it at all. And the hormonal return, deeper sleep, better testosterone production, improved morning energy is disproportionate to how simple it is. Important note, if nasal obstruction is significant, address that first. If you have diagnosed sleep apnea, work with a doctor. But for the large number of people who are simply habitual mouth breathers at night without a structural problem, this one intervention can meaningfully shift your hormonal health over weeks and months. And the fifth practice, conscious nasal breathing during intimacy. This is the practice I want you to try, and I want to explain exactly why it works before you dismiss it as too simple. During intimacy, as arousal builds, breathing naturally becomes faster and shifts to the mouth. This is instinctive, but it has a specific effect. It gradually moves the nervous system toward its alert state. For men, this can mean reduced control and premature arousal. For women, it often means a slow drift out of the body and into the thinking mind. Sensation becomes commentary. Deliberate nasal breathing during intimacy, slower, deeper, belly rising, keeps the nervous system in its calm, open state. It sustains the blood flow to genital tissue through the nitric oxide pathway we covered in part 1. It keeps the nerve hub inside the nose actively signaling the pelvic organs. It maintains the olfactory desire pathway. Every mechanism we mapped in part 1 stays switched on. This is not a performance technique, it is a presence technique. The breath keeps you inside the experience. Tantric traditions across many cultures have taught this for centuries, not as complexity, as an anchor. When you notice the breath has shifted to fast and shallow, bring it back to the nose, slow it down. That is the entire practice. Let me bring both episodes together in a final thought. Across part 1 and part 2, we have covered the full equation. The nitric oxide your sinuses produce that makes arousal possible. The nasal erectile tissue that mirrors genital tissue. The nerve reflex between nose and genitals. The nerve hub inside your nasal cavity with direct connections to your pelvic organs. The smell pathway that leads straight to desire. The cortisol competition that quietly depletes your reproductive hormones. The sleep mechanism that makes testosterone at night and what mouth breathing does to it. The male and female specifics and 5 practices that directly address every part of this. One thread through all of it, whether you breathe through your nose or your mouth. I want to be clear about something before I close. I am not saying nasal breathing is the only factor in reproductive and sexual health. It isn't. There are many variables in that equation: nutrition, relationships, stress, medical history, environment. I am not asking you to replace any of that with a breathing practice, but I am saying this with full confidence. If you are not breathing through your nose, you are working against the system. You are restricting the molecule that makes arousal possible. You are bypassing the nerve that regulates your pelvis. You are keeping your nervous system in a state that suppresses the very hormones your reproductive health depends on. And you're doing it 20,000 times a day. The most immediate thing you can do for your hormonal health, your reproductive health, and your intimate life right now is free. It requires no equipment, no protocol, no prescription. Close your mouth. Breathe. One slow nasal inhale, one long nasal exhale. Start with that one. I'm Nisha. Thank you for being here for both parts of this episode. If it gave you something, please pass it on. Breathe well and breathe through your nose. I will see you guys in the next episode.